The house is quiet now, a silence that I earned, an emptiness I deserve. It's been 3 months since the last time I heard laughter echo through these halls, and I've memorized every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock that Ethan bought for our 10th anniversary. Every night, when the echoes of what used to be a happy family have finally faded, I sit in the same chair where I used to read bedtime stories to my twins, and I tell myself the same thing. I am a selfish woman. My ex-husband has every reason to hate me. My family is fractured beyond repair, and I will never, ever stop hating myself for what I did. People think guilt fades with time. They're wrong. It grows heavier, like sediment settling at the bottom of a lake. Each day adds another layer until you can barely move under the weight of it. My selfish act destroyed everything that mattered, and this is my confession, a whisper into the infinite void. Created, hoping that maybe, just maybe, telling this story will serve as a warning to someone else who might be standing where I once stood. Because if there's one thing I've learned in these years of silence, it's that some choices don't just change your life, they obliterate it completely. In 2015, at 39 years old, I took Ethan's love for granted. And that's not just guilt talking, that's the brutal truth I've had years to face. For 20 years, since we were high school sweethearts at Jefferson High, he never stopped calling me beautiful. Even on my worst days, when I felt like a stranger in my own skin, when I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and see every flaw magnified, Ethan would come up behind me and tell me I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He was a good husband. No, scratch that. He was an exceptional husband, the kind other women envied. He remembered anniversaries, brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, and never once raised his voice at me in anger. He was a wonderful father to our 4 children, our sons, Leo and Noah, who were 16 and 14 at the time, and our twin girls, Mia and Sophie, who had just turned 12. My entire family adored him. He was the man everyone turned to when they needed help moving, when their car broke down, when they needed someone steady and reliable. But here's the thing about being married to someone perfect, it can make you feel like you're drowning in your own inadequacy. After years of pregnancies and the inevitable weight gain that followed, I felt invisible. Not to Ethan, never to Ethan, but to myself. I'd look in the mirror and see a middle-aged mother of 4 who had lost herself somewhere between diaper changes and soccer practices. Though Ethan still looked at me with that same raw desire he'd had since we were teenagers, something any woman would kill, for I found it suffocating. Sometimes, when he'd look at me for too long, when his eyes would follow me across the room with that intense adoration, a strange unease would crawl under my skin. It felt like his love was a beautiful, invisible cage, possessive and absolute, like I was his prized possession rather than his partner. I refused the couples therapy he suggested. We don't need therapy, I'd say. We're fine. But we weren't fine. I wasn't fine. I was restless, dissatisfied, and I blamed him for my own emptiness instead of looking inward. My 39th year became a turning point. I joined a gym after Sophie made an offhand comment about how mom clothes made me look older. It stung because it was true. After a year of religiously attending fitness classes and yoga sessions, I dropped from 180 pounds to a lean 135. The transformation was dramatic, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. But it was a dangerous kind of power. Ethan tried to join me on this journey. He'd suggest couples workouts, would offer to watch the kids while I went to the gym, would tell me how proud he was of my dedication. But he was still my big, sturdy rock, 6'2", and built like the construction foreman he was. His affection seemed to only grow stronger as I changed, but my own desires were aimed elsewhere. The cruel irony is that as I became more attractive to the outside world, I became less available to the man who had loved me at my worst. Our rare arguments were always about intimacy. I was always the one who said no, who was too tired, who had a headache, who just wasn't in the mood. I can see now how those rejections chipped away at him, piece by piece. Looking back, I realize I was living inside a perfect lie. I had everything: a loving husband who still held my hand during movies, beautiful children who ran to me when they were hurt, a stable life in a house with a white picket fence that we'd painted together. But I craved chaos. I craved the rush of something forbidden, something that would make me feel alive again. I never knew that chaos would come and pulverize everything I held dear, leaving nothing but dust and regret in its wake. Julian Martinez was the new regional manager at the insurance company where I worked as a claims adjuster. He was 35, handsome in that polished, dangerous way that makes smart women do stupid things. Dark hair, designer suits, and the kind of confidence that fills a room. For some reason, he took an interest in me. I used to tell myself, now I know better. It wasn't for some reason. It was calculated, predatory, and I was exactly the type of prey he specialized in hunting. Julian was a predator in the truest sense, and he had an uncanny ability to spot the cracks in a woman's carefully constructed life. He saw a 39-year-old woman who had just reclaimed her body but was deeply insecure about her place in the world. He saw someone hungry for validation, starving for excitement. He saw prey, and he moved in for the kill with surgical precision. It started innocuously enough. A compliment about my work on a difficult claim. An invitation to grab coffee to discuss a case. Casual conversations by the water cooler that lasted just a little too long. At first, I ignored the signals. When his compliments became more personal, I showed him my wedding ring, smiled politely, and redirected the conversation back to work. But Julian didn't give up. If anything, the wedding ring seemed to intrigue him more. He'd make jokes about how lucky my husband was, how he must be quite the man to have locked down someone like me. It was manipulation disguised as flattery, and I was too flattered to see it for what it was. Slowly, carefully, he began to plant seeds of discontent. He'd listen with rapt attention as I complained about the mundane aspects of my life, the endless cycle of school pickups and grocery shopping, the way Ethan left his coffee cup on the counter every morning, how I felt like I was losing myself in the role of wife and mother. "You're too young to feel this trapped," he'd say, his voice full of understanding. "A woman like you deserves to feel alive, to feel desired for who you are, not just for what you do for everyone else." The emotional affair began there, in those seemingly innocent conversations. I found myself thinking about Julian constantly, replaying our interactions, comparing him to Ethan. Julian was new, exciting, unpredictable. He made me feel like I was the most fascinating woman in the world, like I had depths that no one else had ever bothered to explore. He'd text me articles he thought I'd find interesting, always with a note like, "This made me think of you." He'd remember details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. The physical attraction was undeniable. Julian had this way of standing just a little too close during meetings, of letting his hand brush mine when he handed me files. The tension was electric, and I was addicted to it. For the first time in years, I felt desirable, wanted, alive. 6 months into this dangerous dance, he made his move. We were working late on a complex case, alone in the office after everyone else had gone home. The conversation had turned personal, as it always did with Julian. "Can I tell you something, Clara?" he said, moving closer to my desk. "I think about you all the time. I think about what it would be like to really know you, to see the woman behind all those walls you've built." My heart was pounding. I knew I should leave, should put an end to this before it went too far. Instead, I stayed frozen in my chair as he leaned down and kissed me. It was like a dam bursting. All the desire I'd been suppressing, all the hunger for something more, came flooding out in that moment. My mind went completely blank, and for those few seconds, nothing existed except the taste of his lips and the feeling of being wanted. That kiss was the beginning of the end of everything I'd built. The 6-month physical affair that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced even in the early days with Ethan. With Julian, I was bold, insatiable, reckless. I did things I'd refused to do with my husband for years. I made excuses to work late, invented conferences and client meetings that didn't exist. I bought new lingerie that Ethan would never see. The worst part? I enjoyed the deception. There was a sick thrill in having this secret life, in being Clara the devoted wife and mother by day and Clara the passionate lover by night. Julian brought out a side of me I didn't know existed, a selfish, hungry, destructive side that cared only about its own gratification. Meanwhile, at home, I pushed Ethan further and further away. I nitpicked his habits, criticized the way he chewed his food, rolled my eyes when he tried to tell me about his day. I was systematically destroying the man who loved me, and a sick part of me enjoyed the power. Julian had awakened a demon inside me, and I had gladly handed it the keys to my life. The wake-up call came from the last person I expected, my younger brother, David. He showed up at my house on a Tuesday evening in late October, his face grim with an expression I'd never seen before. David had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found the silver lining in every situation. But that night, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Ethan and I had shared thousands of meals, where we'd helped our kids with homework, where we'd planned our future together. The irony wasn't lost on me that this conversation would happen in the heart of the home I was destroying. "Clara, what the hell is going on with you?" David's voice was quiet but filled with a disappointment that cut deeper than any scream could have.
"Ethan came to see me yesterday. He's falling apart."
I tried to play dumb, to act like I didn't know what he was talking about. But David held up his hand to stop me. "Don't," he said. "Just don't. I've watched you treat that man like garbage for months. He thinks you don't love him anymore, and honestly, after seeing how you've been acting, I'm starting to wonder if he's right." The words hit me like a physical blow. For the first time in months, I saw myself through someone else's eyes, and what I saw was ugly. I was destroying the best man I'd ever known, and everyone could see it, except me. "He's thinking about separation," David continued, his voice breaking slightly. 20 years of marriage, Clara. 4 beautiful kids. And he's thinking about walking away because he can't stand to live with someone who clearly despises him. "I don't despise him," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. "Then what is it? What's happened to you?" David leaned forward, searching my face. "Because the sister I grew up with would never treat her family this way. The Clara I know would never make her husband feel like he's not worth loving." That's when I broke. The weight of what I'd been doing, the magnitude of my betrayal, came crushing down on me all at once. I saw my marriage, my family, my entire life balanced on the edge of a cliff, and I was the one pushing it toward the precipice. "I've made a terrible mistake," I whispered, and for the first time in months, I meant every word. David studied my face for a long moment. "It's not too late," he said finally. "But whatever you've done, whoever you've been, it has to stop. Today. Because if you lose Ethan, if you lose those kids, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." He was right. God help me. He was absolutely right. That night, after David left, I sat in my bedroom and took a long, hard look at what I'd become. I thought about Ethan, about the way he used to smile when I walked into a room, about how that smile had faded over the past months. I thought about my children, who had started walking on eggshells around me, sensing the tension but not understanding it. I made a decision. I was going to end things with Julian immediately. I was going to quit my job, remove myself from temptation, and dedicate myself to rebuilding what I'd nearly destroyed. I was going to become the wife Ethan deserved and the mother my children needed. The next morning, I called Julian and told him it was over. I expected him to accept it gracefully, to understand that what we'd had was wrong and needed to end. I was naive enough to think he'd respect my decision. I was wrong. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice taking on a hard edge I'd never heard before. "Not after everything we've shared. Not after you've shown me who you really are." "It's over, Julian. I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sorry, but it has to be. We'll see about that, he replied, and the threat in his voice made my skin crawl. I quit my job that same day, telling my boss I needed to focus on my family. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought Julian would accept reality and move on. I was wrong about that too. 3 days later, he showed up at my front door. It was a Thursday afternoon and the kids were still at school. I saw him through the peephole and felt my heart start racing. I considered not answering, but I knew he'd seen my car in the driveway. What are you doing here? I asked, opening the door but keeping the chain lock engaged. I brought some things from your desk, he said, holding up a small box. Thought you might want them back. It was a lie, and we both knew it, but like a fool, I opened the door. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. This wasn't the charming, seductive Julian I knew. This was someone darker, more dangerous. He backed me into the living room, his eyes never leaving mine. You think you can just use me and throw me away? He said, his voice low and threatening. 6 months, Clara. 6 months of telling me you'd never felt this way before, that I understood you in ways your husband never could. And now you want to pretend it never happened? Julian, please. I started, but he cut me off. No, he said, stepping closer. You don't get to do this. You don't get to awaken something in yourself and then run back to your boring little life like nothing changed. He was standing so close I could smell his cologne, the same scent that had once driven me wild and now made me feel sick. This was manipulation in its purest form, and I was finally seeing Julian for what he really was. Just one last time, Clara, he whispered, his hand reaching up to touch my face. One last time to say goodbye properly. To remember what you're giving up. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, and in my weakness, in my guilt, in my complete inability to stand up for myself, I agreed. That decision, that moment of weakness would cost me everything I'd ever loved. We were in the guest room on the first floor, the room that had once been Ethan's home office before he'd moved his work materials to the basement to make space for when his parents visited. The irony of defiling that particular space wasn't lost on me, even in my state of self-destruction. I don't know how long it lasted. Time seemed suspended, as if the universe was holding its breath. I kept telling myself this was the last time, that after this I would never see Julian again, that I could somehow compartmentalize this final betrayal and move on with my life. I was living in a fantasy, and reality was about to come crashing down in the most brutal way possible. It happened so suddenly that at first, I thought I was imagining things. Julian, who had been whispering in my ear, suddenly went rigid. His entire body tensed, and his face went pale as he stared over my shoulder toward the doorway. There was no sound at first. No footsteps, no door slamming, no voice calling out. Just a presence so heavy and threatening that it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. I turned my head, and there he was. Ethan was standing in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, jeans covered in sawdust, a flannel shirt, steel-toed boots. He must have come home early, maybe to surprise me, maybe because he'd been thinking about our conversation from the night before when I'd promised him things would get better between us. His hands hung at his sides, empty but somehow more menacing than if he'd been holding a weapon. But it was his eyes that terrified me most. Those eyes that had looked at me with love and desire for 20 years were completely empty, not angry, not hurt, just vacant, as if someone had reached inside him and scooped out his soul. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. I wanted to say something, anything, his name, an apology, an explanation, but my throat had closed up completely. I was drowning in the weight of what he was seeing, what I had done to us. Julian, in what I can only describe as a moment of complete insanity, broke the silence first. You should step back if you know what's good for you, man, he said, his voice full of arrogant bravado as he moved to shield me from Ethan's view. This isn't what it looks like. Even now, years later, I can't believe he said those words. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire, like screaming at a hurricane to stop. In that moment, Julian revealed himself to be not just a predator, but a fool. That's when the emptiness in Ethan's eyes disappeared, replaced by something primal and terrifying. 20 years of marriage, and I had never seen this side of him. I didn't even know it existed. He moved faster than I thought possible for a man his size. One moment he was standing in the doorway, the next he had launched himself across the room with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The first sound was a sickening thud as Ethan's fist connected with Julian's jaw. It was followed immediately by the distinct crack of bone breaking. Julian went down hard, but Ethan wasn't finished. Not even close. "Ethan, stop!" I screamed, scrambling to cover myself and move toward them. "Please, you have to stop!" But he couldn't hear me. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and savage that my betrayal had unleashed. He straddled Julian and began hitting him systematically, methodically, each blow landing with terrifying precision. Julian tried to fight back at first, tried to get his hands up to protect his face, but Ethan was beyond reason, beyond mercy. This was 20 years of devotion being repaid with the ultimate betrayal, and his rage was absolute. I threw myself at Ethan's back, wrapping my arms around his neck, trying to pull him off. He shrugged me off like I weighed nothing, sending me crashing into the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. When I managed to get back on my feet, Julian was no longer moving. His face was a mess of blood and swelling, barely recognizable as human. One eye was completely swollen shut, his nose was clearly broken, and there was blood coming from his mouth. Ethan was sitting back on his heels, breathing heavily, his knuckles split and bloody. He looked down at Julian with something that might have been surprise, as if he was just now realizing what he'd done. Then, with shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," he said, his voice eerily calm considering what had just happened. "And police. I think I've seriously hurt someone." The dispatcher asked him what happened, and that's when the calm facade cracked. "My wife," he said, his voice breaking. "I caught my wife with another man in our house, in our home, and I lost control. I think I might have killed him." I could hear the dispatcher trying to keep him on the line, asking him questions, telling him help was on the way. But all I could focus on was the sound of Ethan crying deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. 20 years, he kept saying between sobs. 20 years, and she, in our home. I thought she loved me. I thought we were happy. The siren seemed to arrive within minutes, though it felt like hours. Paramedics rushed in and immediately went to work on Julian, who was unconscious but still breathing. Police officers separated Ethan and me, reading him his rights while he sat there numbly, offering no resistance. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. The emptiness was back in his eyes, but now it was mixed with something worse, disappointment, so profound it was like looking into an abyss. "I loved you," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "I loved you more than my own life." Then he was gone, and I was left alone with the wreckage of everything I had destroyed. The trial was a nightmare that stretched over 3 months, each day more excruciating than the last. I had to sit in that courtroom day after day, watching the man I loved, the man I had destroyed, being treated like a criminal because of my choices. The prosecutor painted Ethan as a violent man who had snapped, who had nearly beaten another human being to death in a fit of rage. They showed photos of Julian's injuries that made people in the gallery gasp. His orbital bone had been shattered, his jaw broken in 2 places, and he'd suffered a severe concussion that left him with permanent memory issues. But it was the defense attorney's questions that truly destroyed me. I had to sit on that witness stand and recount every sordid detail of my affair. How long it had lasted, where we had met, what we had done together. I had to admit, in front of our families, our friends, our children, that I had betrayed my marriage vows for 6 months. When I confessed the full extent of the affair, I watched Ethan physically recoil in his chair as if I had struck him. My father, a man who had walked me down the aisle and told Ethan he was gaining a son, stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I haven't spoken to him since. But the worst moment came when they played the recording of Ethan's 911 call. 25 minutes of audio that will haunt me until the day I die. 25 minutes of listening to the strongest man I'd ever known completely fall apart, his voice shaking as he tried to follow the dispatcher's instructions while sirens wailed in the background. The love of my life betrayed me. His voice echoed through the silent courtroom.
I thought we were happy. I thought she loved me. How could she do this? How could she bring him into our home?
You could hear him crying, not the angry tears of rage, but the broken sobs of a man whose entire world had just collapsed. The jury was in tears. I was in tears. Even some of the court officers were wiping their eyes. I've never hurt anyone in my life. Ethan continued on the recording. I've never even been in a fight. But seeing them together, in our house, in the room where my children play, I just lost my mind. I lost everything. The prosecution used that recording to show premeditation, to argue that Ethan had time to think about what he was doing. But anyone with ears could hear that this was the sound of a man's soul being ripped apart in real time. Ethan was ultimately sentenced to 7 years for aggravated assault. The judge acknowledged the emotional circumstances but said that nothing justified the level of violence that had occurred. When the verdict was read, the sound that came from my sons, Leo and Noah, will stay with me forever. They screamed at the judge, at the prosecutor, at me. This is all her fault, Leo shouted as court officers moved to restore order. She destroyed our family. After the trial, I returned to our house, but it wasn't home anymore. It was a mausoleum, a monument to everything I had killed. The silence was different now, heavier and more accusatory. It pressed down on me from all sides, reminding me with every breath that I was alone by choice, alone because of what I had done. My children could barely look at me. They would come home from school, grab something to eat, and disappear into their rooms. When I tried to talk to them, they would walk past me as if I were invisible. The twins, who had once crawled into my lap for stories and hugs, now flinched when I tried to touch them. That first night alone, I sat in the dark living room and realized that while Ethan's prison had bars and walls, mine was made of guilt and regret, and there was no sentence that would ever free me from it. The trial was a nightmare that stretched over 3 months, each day more excruciating than the last. I had to sit in that courtroom day after day, watching the man I loved, the man I had destroyed, being treated like a criminal because of my choices. The prosecutor painted Ethan as a violent man who had snapped, who had nearly beaten another human being to death in a fit of rage. They showed photos of Julian's injuries that made people in the gallery gasp. His orbital bone had been shattered, his jaw broken in 2 places, and he'd suffered a severe concussion that left him with permanent memory issues. But it was the defense attorney's questions that truly destroyed me. I had to sit on that witness stand and recount every sordid detail of my affair. How long it had lasted, where we had met, what we had done together. I had to admit, in front of our families, our friends, our children, that I had betrayed my marriage vows for 6 months. When I confessed the full extent of the affair, I watched Ethan physically recoil in his chair as if I had struck him. My father, a man who had walked me down the aisle and told Ethan he was gaining a son, stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. I haven't spoken to him since. But the worst moment came when they played the recording of Ethan's 911 call. 25 minutes of audio that will haunt me until the day I die. 25 minutes of listening to the strongest man I'd ever known completely fall apart, his voice shaking as he tried to follow the dispatcher's instructions while sirens wailed in the background. The love of my life betrayed me. His voice echoed through the silent courtroom.
I thought we were happy. I thought she loved me. How could she do this? How could she bring him into our home?
You could hear him crying, not the angry tears of rage, but the broken sobs of a man whose entire world had just collapsed. The jury was in tears. I was in tears. Even some of the court officers were wiping their eyes. I've never hurt anyone in my life. Ethan continued on the recording. I've never even been in a fight. But seeing them together, in our house, in the room where my children play, I just lost my mind. I lost everything. The prosecution used that recording to show premeditation, to argue that Ethan had time to think about what he was doing. But anyone with ears could hear that this was the sound of a man's soul being ripped apart in real time. Ethan was ultimately sentenced to 7 years for aggravated assault. The judge acknowledged the emotional circumstances but said that nothing justified the level of violence that had occurred. When the verdict was read, the sound that came from my sons, Leo and Noah, will stay with me forever. They screamed at the judge, at the prosecutor, at me. "This is all her fault," Leo shouted as court officers moved to restore order. "She destroyed our family." After the trial, I returned to our house, but it wasn't home anymore. It was a mausoleum, a monument to everything I had killed. The silence was different now, heavier and more accusatory. It pressed down on me from all sides, reminding me with every breath that I was alone by choice, alone because of what I had done. My children could barely look at me. They would come home from school, grab something to eat, and disappear into their rooms. When I tried to talk to them, they would walk past me as if I were invisible. The twins, who had once crawled into my lap for stories and hugs, now flinched when I tried to touch them. That first night alone, I sat in the dark living room and realized that while Ethan's prison had bars and walls, mine was made of guilt and regret, and there was no sentence that would ever free me from it. Early this year, something miraculous seemed to happen. After years of silence and distance, my children started talking to me again. Not about anything meaningful at first, just small talk about school, work, everyday things. But it was conversation, and I clung to it like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. They started spending more time at home, actually joining me for dinner occasionally. Leo would tell me about his job at the engineering firm. Noah would mention his college plans. The twins would actually laugh at my jokes, something I hadn't heard in years. For the first time since the trial, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe we were finally healing. Maybe the wounds I had inflicted were starting to close. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to being a family. When the twins' 18th birthday approached in March, I suggested we throw them a party. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. This would be our first family celebration in years. "That sounds nice, Mom," Mia said, but then her expression shifted. "But Dad's throwing us a party too. We don't want you there when he comes." The words hit me like a physical blow. "When he comes?" I whispered. Sophie looked uncomfortable. "Dad got out in April, Mom. He's been free for 3 months. The world tilted on its axis. Ethan had been released, and I had been the last to know. The reason my children were suddenly happier, suddenly willing to talk to me, had nothing to do with forgiveness. It was because their father was back in their lives. I drove to David's house in a panic, clutching a stack of returned letters, 7 years' worth of correspondence that Ethan had never read. I was going to make him listen to me, make him understand how sorry I was, how much I regretted everything. I saw him through the window, and my heart nearly stopped. He looked older, grayer, but still strong. Still Ethan. I pounded on the door and screamed his name, but David blocked my path. "Clara, don't do this," David said. But I pushed past him, dropping the letters in his hands. "You forgot this," came a voice behind me as I turned to leave. I spun around, and there he was. Ethan was walking toward me, holding my stack of letters. 7 years of apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness, and he was handing them back to me unread. I burst into tears and threw myself at him, wrapping my arms around the man I had never stopped loving despite everything I had done to destroy us. For just a moment, I thought I felt him soften, thought maybe there was still something left of what we had once been. But then he gently but firmly peeled my arms away from him and pressed the letters back into my hands. His touch was cold, clinical, like I was a stranger he was being polite to. "I can't do this, Clara," he said quietly, his voice devoid of the warmth it had once held when he spoke my name. "I can't pretend that what you did didn't happen. I can't pretend that those 7 years didn't happen. Ethan, please." I sobbed, clutching at his shirt. "I'm so sorry. I've been sorry every single day for 8 years. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, can't we try to—" "No," he said, stepping back from me. "We can't. You made your choice that day. You chose him over our family, over our children, over me. and I've spent 7 years learning to live with that choice. I looked past him and saw my children standing in David's doorway, Leo, Noah, Mia, and Sophie. They were watching this scene unfold with expressions I couldn't read. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. The same emptiness I had seen in Ethan's eyes that terrible day. "The kids and I are building something new," Ethan continued. "Something that doesn't include you. They've forgiven me for what I did to Julian, but they haven't forgiven you for what you did to our family. And honestly, Clara, neither have I." He turned and walked back toward the house, toward our children who stepped aside to let their father pass. But none of them looked at me. None of them said goodbye. I stood there in David's driveway, holding 7 years' worth of unread letters, watching my family disappear into a house where I would never be welcome. The silence that surrounded me now was absolute, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of hope. It's been 6 months since that day in David's driveway, and I'm still sitting in this quiet house, still carrying the weight of what I destroyed. I've learned that some mistakes don't just change your life, they end it, at least the life you thought you were living. People talk about closure, about moving on, about healing from trauma. But what they don't tell you is that when you're the one who caused the trauma, when you're the villain in your own story, there is no closure. There is no moving on. There is only the endless echo of what you've done, reverberating through every quiet moment for the rest of your life. I've tried to rebuild, tried to find meaning in this existence I've created for myself. I volunteer at a women's shelter now, listening to stories of abuse and betrayal, trying to offer comfort to women whose lives have been shattered by other people's choices. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm trying to help people heal from the kind of damage I inflicted on my own family. Sometimes, one of these women will ask me how I know so much about betrayal, about the aftermath of broken trust. I never tell them the truth. I can't bear to see the judgment in their eyes when they realize I'm not a survivor, I'm a perpetrator. My children are thriving without me. I see their pictures on David's social media graduations, achievements, family gatherings, where the missing piece is me. They look happy, whole, like a family that has healed from a terrible wound. I'm the wound that had to be excised for them to survive. Leo got engaged last month. I found out through Facebook, saw the pictures of him and his fiancée surrounded by family. Ethan was there, of course, beaming with pride at his oldest son. My absence from that moment was so complete it was like I had never existed at all. The twins started college this fall. Sophie is studying psychology, which breaks my heart in ways I can't explain. I wonder if she's trying to understand what drove me to destroy everything we had. Mia is majoring in early childhood education. She wants to work with kids, to give them the stability and love that I stole from her own childhood. Noah got a full scholarship to play football at State. I drove to his first game and sat in the parking lot, too afraid to go in but unable to stay away completely. Through the fence, I could see Ethan in the stands, cheering for his son, surrounded by family and friends. He looked like a man who had found peace, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of what I burned down. I didn't go to the game. I sat in my car and cried until the parking lot emptied, then drove home to my silent house. The hardest part isn't the loneliness, though that weighs on me every day. The hardest part is knowing that my family is better off without me. They've healed, they've grown, they've found joy again, and none of that would have been possible if I were still in their lives. I destroyed the best thing I ever had for 6 months of meaningless passion. I traded 20 years of love, 4 beautiful children, and a man who would have died for me, all for the thrill of feeling desired by someone new. The house is quiet now, and it always will be. This is the silence I earned, the emptiness I deserve. And every night, when the echoes of the family I destroyed have faded, I sit in this chair and tell myself the same thing. I am a selfish woman who got exactly what she deserved. But that doesn't make the silence any easier to bear.